Hi Year 13, so the poem I'm going to go over in this video is Remember, again by Rossetti. So I will do as I usually do, I'll go through the starting activity, there will be some contextual information in this one as well, and then I will go into my breakdown of the actual poem. So straight into the starting activity, you've got there some terms that will be relevant when we're looking at this poem, so see if you can remember what is meant by this. So you've got a Petrarchan sonnet, you've got sestet, octet and volta. If obviously you went in the lesson, please do pause and have a little go at recalling that information now, and then we will go through them. So hopefully you did pause. So Petrarchan sonnet then is a 14-line poem that usually focuses on love. I will go into it in a little bit more detail because if it is a Petrarchan sonnet, then there are very specific rules to it being a Petrarchan sonnet. A sestet is 6 lines of poetry in a stanza. An octet is 8 lines of poetry in a stanza, and the volta then is a turn between the first half of the poem, the octet, and the second half, the sestet, in a Petrarchan sonnet. And it's sort of a turning point. There can be a shift in mood or a shift in focus, but it's basically just a turning point. Alright, so on to what a Petrarchan sonnet is. I did say I'd go into this in a bit more detail. So the octet in a Petrarchan sonnet is always following a rhyme pattern of A, B, B, A, A, B, B, A. Sometimes a writer will break this part of the poem up into 2 stanzas of 8 lines, each of which rhymes A, B, B, A. Sorry, of 2 stanzas of 4 lines. The sestet, on the other hand, is not so consistently structured. It is open to change. Some of the most common rhyming patterns are C, D, C, D, C, D, or C, D, E, C, D, E in the sestet, and C, D, C, D, E, E, but there is no set pattern in the sestet part of the Petrarchan sonnet. Writers can stray far from one of these 3 and still have their poems considered to be a Petrarchan sonnet. Petrarchan sonnets also make use of iambic pentameter. This means that each line contains 5 sets of 2 beats known as metrical feet. The first is unstressed, the second is stressed. It sounds something like almost a heart rhythm, that da-dum, da-dum. So hopefully you've covered that. We've covered that before anyway, certainly in my class, but that is something that we can go over again as well in a bit more detail. So some contextual information. So if you were not in the lesson, if you just pause at this point so you can take some notes on this contextual information, as it will be relevant directly with the poem that we're having a little look at. So some context then, in the mourning period in Victorian England. So the mourning period being a period of grief when you've lost someone close to you. So by the 19th century, mourning behaviour in England had developed into a complex set of rules, particularly among the upper class. And this was probably sort of perpetuated by Queen Victoria, who entered into an extended time of mourning when her husband died. In fact, when he died, she continued for the rest of her life to wear mourning clothes. So we had this very complex then set of rules that were sort of followed when it came to a mourning period. For women, the customs involved wearing heavy, concealing black clothing and the use of heavy veils of black crape. The entire ensemble was colloquially known as widow's weeds, from the Old English weed meaning garment. Special caps and bonnets, usually in black or other dark colours, went with these ensembles. There was special mourning jewellery, often made of jet, which is black stone. Jewellery was also occasionally made from the hair of the deceased. The wealthy would wear cameos or lockets designed to hold a lock of the deceased hair, or some similar relic. Widows were expected to wear special clothes to indicate that they were in mourning for up to 4 years after the death, although a widow could choose to wear such attire for the rest of her life, and as I said, I mentioned there, Queen Victoria did do that. To change the costume earlier was considered disrespectful to the deceased, and if the widow was still young and attractive, suggestive of potential sexual promiscuity, which obviously would have been frowned upon in the Victorian era. Those subjects to the rules were slowly allowed to reintroduce conventional clothing at specific time periods, so there were stages to mourning. So such stages were known by such terms as full mourning, half mourning, and similar descriptions. For half mourning, you were allowed to wear more muted colours such as lilac, grey and lavender. So, like I said, very strict rules about that. Widows were expected to wear the clothes. Oh, sorry, I don't know why this is repeated, but I'm going to skip to that last point there. However, amongst polite company, the wearing of a simple black armband was seen as appropriate only for military men, so they could wear, and you might be able to see it on some of the sort of maybe films or dramas that you've seen, but they'd wear a band, black band, and that was only considered appropriate if military men or someone similar who had to wear a uniform in the course of their duties, that would be seen as appropriate, but they would try to avoid that as much as possible. A black armband instead of proper morning clothes was seen as a degradation of proper etiquette and to be avoided. In general, men are expected to wear morning suits, not to be confused with morning suits, of black frock coats with matching trousers and waistcoats. Now, I did pull up, obviously, examples of that in the lesson, but if you weren't in, just have a little Google and look at the difference of those. Of black frock coats with matching trousers and waistcoats. In the latter interbellum period between World War I and World War II, as the frock coat became increasingly rare, the morning suit consisted of a black morning coat with black trousers and waistcoat. Essentially a black version of the morning suit worn to weddings and other occasions, which would normally include coloured waistcoats and striped or checked trousers. So, like I said, very strict rules there around sort of the rituals then that were linked to grieving and mourning in the Victorian era. So this is going to lead us into our copy of the poem. So as I always do, I will read through it to begin with. I will have the questions up there for you as well. So have a little think about inferring from the title of the poem, which is obviously always important. We don't want to neglect that. And then consider in what ways does the poet avoid explicitly addressing death, and what is the impact of that? Why do you think the poem is written in sonnet form, and what is the effect of the Volta? Remember me when I am gone away, gone far away into the silent land, when you can no more hold me by the hand, nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me when no more day by day you tell me of our future that you planned. Only remember me, you understand. It will be too late. It will be late to counsel then, or pray. Yet if you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, do not grieve. For if the darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thoughts that once I had, better by far you should forget and smile, than that you should remember and be sad. Alright, so obviously if you were not in the lesson, as always, pause here and have a little go at sort of having your own critical perspective towards this poem by answering those questions before I then sort of offer you some of the ideas that I've had about the poem, and then what I've kind of seen others interpret the poem as. Alright, so the title then, obviously clearly linking to the idea of remembrance, and the idea of memory then is strongly linked here. And certainly when we think about grief and passing of someone, then memory is probably the most important part of that sort of grief as well, sort of being able to look back and think of that person fondly. Going in then to the first line of the poem, remember me, so we have this imperative immediately sort of hooking the reader in. When I am gone away. And here we have almost a euphemism, so she's not actually directly addressing death here, and it almost gives it a softer edge. So gone away, gone far away. So we've got this emphasis now on distance already, particularly when we've got that description here of far. Into the silent land. Now, silent there, that description, that adjective, I mean, there's certainly a symbolism of death here. But is there an element of maybe loneliness, or is it peaceful? And also, if there is, bearing in mind that Rossetti was very highly religious, if it is a reference to heaven, possibly. Now, in her belief, she would have believed that when you die, you go to heaven, and there would be no way to communicate back with the people left behind. So maybe it is suggesting that idea of there's a loss of connection then, that you're no longer able to talk to that person and communicate with that person. So that could be a clear reference there to that idea. When you can no more hold me by the hand. So we've got here this, I'm going to grab my pen and add this in now. We've got this alliteration of hold and hand, so drawing attention to this phrase here again. When you can no more hold me by the hand. And I've said about the importance and the significance and symbolism of hands, and that idea as well that they can show sort of a physical bond between two people, closeness, protection, think about sort of the reasonings that you hold someone's hand. You hold your parents' hands because when you're young, they want to sort of protect you and hold you close to them and keep you safe. You hold a lover's hands when you're older to show that connection and to feel close to them. And again, I suppose there's that element of kind of a bond between you as well. So there's the significance there of the hand, but emphasising as well the physical presence has gone, so they can no longer see them, and feel them and touch them. And the hand as well, hand in marriage, maybe there's a link there as well. And potentially this could be a reference to one of her engagements as well. Maybe one of the men that she rejected, this could be maybe potentially aimed towards them. Nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. We've got here a reluctance almost. There's juxtaposition in that phrase. We've got this idea then, death is very much dominated Victorian life. If you think about it, in the Victorian era, you still had disease and death, particularly when it came to illness, because they didn't have the medication that we have now, and also childbirth as well. So the mortality rate was very high during the Victorian era, and therefore there's this kind of reluctance here, this hesitancy. Nor I half turn to go, yet turning stay. Remember me, and we've got this emphasis here, this anaphora now, where this phrase has been repeated. Remember me, remember me. So there's clearly that sort of a need to be remembered and to be sort of thought of beyond her death. So remember me when no more day by day. And that sort of phrase, that sort of maybe the emphasising the routine of life, the almost, I've put it here, monotonous idea of day by day, but also maybe suggesting the closeness of that person, someone that they see so often. You tell me of our future that you planned. Interesting phrasing here, and the use of the personal pronoun, so you directing at him. You tell me of our future that you planned. The use of the personal pronoun is almost accusatory. You, that you had planned. Is there maybe showing an element of control here? Maybe part of the reason that she rejected him in terms of marriage, that he had these plans, but they were not necessarily her plans. You tell me, and there's a division there in the way that she's sort of explaining how it's him, very much kind of this verb actively telling her of a shared future, that collective pronoun our future that you planned. And again, the sort of verbs very much his actions and his doing. So is he in control? Only remember me, you understand. And this caesura here kind of emphasising particularly the division between those personal pronouns me, you. And antithesis here as well, because remembrance is very much kind of linked to emotions and feelings. You remember fondly the people that you love, and yet understanding is more of a logical process. Understanding something is more of an intellectual pursuit rather than remembrance being something that is meant to be happy and that you gain happiness from. So there's antithesis there as well between those two. It would be too late to counsel then or pray. Now, that is a biblical reference so contextually, again, Rossetti's beliefs would be that when you die, if you go to heaven or whether you go to hell, that will already have been decided at your death. So there's no point in praying for somebody who's already died in terms of their redemption, or wishing the best for them in prayer, because actually their fate has already been sealed. It's already been decided whether they've gone to heaven or hell. So there's that spiritual link there that was so important to her. Probably one of the most important aspects of Rossetti is her devout belief in Christianity, and particularly the Anglican faith. And I will go through that obviously in one of our other lessons as well that we've covered already. But her Anglican faith had this belief then that once you died, it had already been decided that you'd go to heaven or hell based on obviously your conduct through life. So now this is where we've got our Volta. So she's got this kind of urging desperation to be remembered at the beginning here. And now we have this Volta, this change in the sestet. Yet, if you should forget me for a while. So forget, she's been so urgent and sort of insistent on being remembered. Again, we've got antithesis here, so this idea of, if you should forget me, and this modal verb, almost suggesting that she doesn't necessarily want him to forget. If you should forget me for a while, and afterwards remember, so again, that antithesis, forget and remember as well. Do not grieve, and we've got that emotive language. And that sort of end focus as well on the emotive language. It sort of suggests that he should be grieving, really. For if the darkness and corruption, so this is kind of the reality of grief. So darkness and corruption leave a vestige of the thought that once I had. Better by far you should forget and smile. So we've got this comparative verb, better. It's not best, but it's better. So there's almost a reluctance, maybe, potentially, in her wanting him to sort of be happy and forget. And you can interpret that two ways. I mean, I have read an alternative interpretation of this idea that, particularly at the end when she sort of has that end focus on sad, some suggest that actually she's not necessarily wishing him happiness, to her lover, to sort of carry on and forget. But better by far you should forget and smile, and you've got the antithesis here in the end, stopped, smile and sad, contrasting with each other, juxtaposing really the two emotions, that you should remember and be sad. And again, these sort of modal verbs are far less confirming than these imperatives at the opening of the poem. Remember me, and then she's saying, oh, but if you should forget, if you should, which is sort of more hesitant. This is far more powerful. Remember me. It's just almost like a reluctance that she knows that's how maybe she should feel, that she should allow him to kind of be happy and move on, but actually she doesn't really want him to. That you should remember and be sad. So like I said, you've got that antithesis then between smile and sad, and it ends on that kind of potentially on acceptance, but actually others have suggested that that could be a kind of reluctance, that she doesn't really want him to forget, and she sort of wishes for him to grieve her passing. So hopefully that's helped, that breakdown. As always, I will just quickly mention the structure. So it is written in a sonnet form and clearly linked to this idea of a lover, someone that she was close to. It's unclear whether this is written for potentially aimed at one of the men that she was engaged to. But obviously a sonnet form, it is typically sonnets were written with the theme of love in mind. So that fits very closely with this idea of it being directed towards a lover. Thinking then about themes, so you've got the role of women. In some respects the poem highlights the passivity of women, because at the beginning, she does seem to sort of enforce the idea of being remembered, but then at the end she's kind of almost conforming to that idea of a passive woman and saying, but it's okay if you forget. But therefore the tone can be interpreted as maybe rebellious or resentful towards the beginning, particularly when she's talking about remember me. Grief, so like I said, contextually the poem would resonate very strongly with the readers as mortality rates in Victorian England were so high. And then religion, because Rossetti was obviously highly religious and would have believed that prayers for her after her death would be of no use, and I've mentioned that obviously as I've gone through it. So you've got there as well the bibliography. So those were some of the sources that I had a little look at then as well, to sort of confirm some of the ideas I had about the poem, and obviously as well to offer alternative interpretations as well. But obviously the more sources that you look at, then the more notes you've got, and the more you've got to kind of talk about with the poems. So hopefully that's helped, but as always, any issues, any questions, just drop me a little message either on our Google Classroom or on our or via our school email.